If the left does it, then
The left has always done it.
why?
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
they call
they'll accept
themselves left.
I know.
They're for the workers, not punish the workers.
But the interesting thing is that the workers still believe them because they get voted.
So why do they believe them? Is it propaganda or
No, because
wrong education?
Look, why do people go to church?
Because they want to believe in something that's not there.
No, because their fathers and mothers went to church normally.
Tradition.
Tradition.
All right, Young Naive, we're in beautiful Italy. It's a sunny day and need to wear my shades. And who's my guest now?
Your guest is Marcello de Cecco, an old professor of economic history, monetary history, things like that, at this private university called Lewis. And that's enough about him.
So I hope you can tell me a little bit about Italy's economy. Does Italy have an economy?
Well, you can see it, I've just come back from Tunisia, and I can assure you that Italy has an economy. When you see real countries without economies, then you realize that this is a very dangerous moment, because Italy might unbecome an economy. But so far is the second, say, industrial producer after Germany in Europe, so that's enough.
What does Italy produce?
Everything you produce.
What?
Machinery, then light goods, textiles, and then finished chemicals, then a few aeroplanes, a few automobiles.
Does Italy produce something that Germany doesn't produce?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think so, except for a few things that are typical. You cannot produce oranges, can you? But then that's not very much. All these various fruits. And what is called made in Italy. Because made in Italy is something which is characterized by elegance and various other design. But the Germans don't have as much design of that kind. Oh. But in the end, they sell twice as many the furniture abroad as we do. And the same about food. Right. The German food is not fancy, but they sell it. That's very interesting. It's reliable, it's good. They sell it. We sell very fancy food, and you count them, and it's twice as much. German exports of this.
What about, I think, what Italy's economy is probably better in is the textile industry, the fashion?
The fashion, yes, the high-level fashion. Yes, it is still big, and I think all the designing ateliers are in Italy. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the manufacturer is staged, well, as the Germans do, you relocate the easy stages abroad to a cheap country, and then they bring back and they finish them and they put made in Italy.
Why don't they produce it here if it's made in Italy?
Because it's more expensive. Why don't you know where the Porsche Cayenne is produced?
Not in Germany.
No, it's produced in Slovakia.
Because it's
one tenth of the salaries.
1/10.
Yes, 1/10.
Why don't they want to pay Italian people the real pay?
Well, for the same reasons as the Germans relocate to Prague or to Poland or to other parts of Eastern Europe, because the wage is lower.
But that means also Italians lose their jobs, or don't?
Of course. But what do they care?
The companies.
It's so-called the free economy, no? And so it's run by so-called multinationals. We have a few. You have many more. The Americans have even more. So it's a world phenomenon. And that means that probably the multinationals make more money, but definitely the people who have invented these trades in the developed countries lose their jobs.
So, I mean, are the workers of Italy and Germany or of the world dependent on those multinationals, or are they victims of it? Because the multinationals can always go where it's cheaper.
Yes, that's true, but it's always been true. It was slower before. Suppose a government started wanting to bother a company in the 19th century, and this was a foreign company or even a national company. It would take longer, much longer, but it would happen that they would relocate. I can quote you any number of examples. Only took a long time.
Right.
Now it is the thing that really strikes is that it's not like this.
But
One day they're here, one day they're somewhere else.
couldn't you make the companies if they want to call themselves Italian, if they want to call themselves made in Italy, can you make them okay? Like 50% of all the people that produce something have to be Italian.
Yeah, but I don't think that how do you say, is permitted by the regulations of the European Union.
Well, then change the regulations.
Yeah, but some of these people are not interested. For instance, don't know whether the Germans are interested in such a rule because it would apply to them too.
But then in the end, there are more workers than people that lead the companies.
There are more workers here
Right.
that get employed.
Right.
But then there are less workers in Tunisia that get employed. Think about that.
What does that mean?
It means that you get back these wages here, but they lose them. So it's it's a zero-sum game.
Right.
In the sense that somebody gains and somebody loses. So who are we interested in? Are we interested more in the poor people of Sri Lanka getting a salary of a sort, or are we interested more in our own people? It's a serious problem. It is not,
Maybe in both.
yes, of course, but doing it so that it benefits everybody is very difficult.
Why don't the Italian companies pay the Italian workers as much as the Slovakian workers?
And that is what I think Mrs. Merkel in the end would like us to do, but we are not used to that.
Is it going to happen?
No, because now people having been used to having a good salary, this is an old country with very few children. On top, like in Germany. On top of that,
I thought it's the country of love. Why don't they make a lot of love?
they make a lot of love, but very few children.
What's wrong with that?
No, the fact is that then they are supported by their families, so they don't want to go and work for whatever salary, a low salary, and that happens to you as well.
Right.
The difference is that in Germany families don't last forever, in the sense that children are sent away on their own when they are 18. Here, like in all the Catholic countries, they tend to stay at home. It's a very old habit.
Or maybe German kids are glad to move out. Like, oh, I'm gonna get rid of it.
So was I when I was young.
Right.
But now people have got so frightened for such a long time that they don't really want to move.
Right.
Also, in my time, we were much poorer, so the fathers and the mothers could not keep them. But now they keep them. They don't have more than one or two, not 7 or 8 or 5.
Which is actually a good thing.
So they can keep them forever.
Right.
But they don't work. And they don't want to do those jobs that are here. They're all taken by foreign immigrants.
Because the foreign immigrants accept a smaller pay?
Expect a smaller pay and accept extremely tough working conditions. And they accept living in very unpleasant quarters, which is always better than home. Now, we have done it. You did it before us. Europeans emigrated in enormous amounts in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. Germans populated the United States, for instance. They went also to Brazil. If you want to see some actual poor Germans, you have to go to Brazil. Some of them are even barefoot. You will see it's very remarkable thing. They've been more or less left in that corner. Italians in that conditions, there are many more, even today. So we have done it, and now it's the turn of these people to do it. But it's not very pleasant, and it causes problems, because I don't know how you do it, but here people come and beg. See, perhaps Germany, I think in Germany it is forbidden to beg.
To beg what?
To beg in the streets. See, have you got a coin?
No, they do it there too. They can do it.
Yeah, they can do it, but somehow they find more jobs. I don't know. Here it has become something absolutely incredible.
Well, I mean, in Germany, in the last 10, 15 years, we created a low-income sector. So
I know.
The people who are not qualified enough at least have a job, get almost no money. I mean, they can have a good life, but at least they have a job. So they don't march on the streets and demand jobs because they have jobs at least.
Yeah, but also there is a civilization of shame in Germany,
Really?
in the sense that people are ashamed if they don't have a job.
And in Italian, it's
Well, the
different.
Italians think it's somebody's fault, so they take it out on the government.
And the Germans are they're ashamed of themselves when they
Well,
do.
the Germans have a very old civilization of shame because of Protestant ethic, and that's if you don't work, it's your fault.
But aren't you Christian as well?
Yeah, but the
So-
Catholic Christianity is quite different. That's why you had a reform. And Luther had a reform, a reformation.
I'm not really keen on religion.
Neither do I, but I have to study it
Right.
because it's my job to study.
Religion.
Yes, because religion and money have
Really?
very often gone together.
Tell me about it.
Well, the German reform, Martin Luther, was objecting to the fact that you had to pay a tribute to Rome because the Romans were building St. Peter, and it was incredibly expensive. So they asked for more and more tribute, and they sold, how do you say, the absol things that you got relieved of all your sins if you came to Rome and paid. And so all this money was going away from Germany, and Luther was not against the rich people. And
Jesus was.
yes, Jesus was, but Luther was not. And he, more or less for various reasons, started this Reformation, especially because a strange pope started wanting to build a fantastic church, which was incredibly expensive.
Well, now we have the church, but there's no.
But not
Luther.
only that, but the Pope was also a Medici, member of the Medici family, so he was a merchant and a banker.
Really?
That's all the trades that took the money away from Germany were operated by the Italian bankers. So it's a complex story, the Reformation, but it begins with St. Peter's, the new church.
Okay.
That's a bit of a story.
Let's get back to Italy's economy. How has it been doing the last 20, 30 years? And then let's go talk later about how it's doing now. How has it been developing?
Well, it
last decade?
started having problems in about 1992, long time ago.
20 years ago.
Yes, we have been not doing well for 20 years.
Wow.
You know, it doesn't look like it, did not look like it for a long time, because at the same time, there was a very great decrease in the increase of population. So the population started growing at a much slower pace. So the people who were actually alive there, had more money. But it was not created, it was distributed to fewer people, as it were.
Fewer
And,
people.
Yes, the same thing is in Germany. All these countries are the same. So fewer people earned more money, so it looked as if they were more rich. But the thing was not happening. It was, the country was not growing. And we had these, it's like when you had the same problem from 2000 to 2005 in Germany because of the after costs of unification and so on. And, all the welfare state started decreasing, and you had this,
Because capitalism won.
well,
And,
it didn't,
socialism lost.
socialism lost, but socialists had plenty of time to do the reforms, and Mr. Schroeder, after all, is a socialist, isn't he?
I heard he's a neoliberal.
He calls himself a socialist, Mr. Schroeder.
I learned in Spain and in Greece that the so-called left parties, the Social Democrats, they're not really left. They do.
But these are judgments. I'm going by the emblem they have on their. They call themselves Il Partito Socialista Tedesco, Deutschland Sozialistische Partei. No?
But it's just a label. I mean, they pretend to be
Yeah, no,
one thing.
some of them are and some of them are not. And also,
But they-
if you have a democracy, everybody has to vote for the people who win.
Right.
And therefore, you have to defend all sorts of interests, not only the workers.
But
Otherwise, you lose.
right.
And if you have a revolution, then maybe you win. But if you want to live by the democratic system, there are elections. You only get supported maybe by a few workers. You don't get the majority, and that's it.
But is democracy only about elections every 4 years?
Well, it seems to have become like that. Huh?
That's not
No, but
democracy.
for instance, all these problems with the euro in really started with these bloody German elections every month. You remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mrs. Wanted to win, and she had problems, and therefore she had become more and more and more right wing. And since she's an opportunist, like all, say, democratic politicians, she adjusted to the electorate.
So
And the electorate was not very happy because they had lost their jobs because Schroeder had imposed very bad conditions on them compared to before. And so, because of each election, every 2 or 3 months, every month, there was an uncertainty about the euro and an uncertainty about the debt, the public debt of these countries like Italy, Spain, Greece, and so on. And it was a state of disequilibrium caused by these elections that happen every month, not every 4 years.
but nobody cared about that until 5 years ago. What
And
happened?
because it wasn't there, what happened was that we had this so-called crisis.
What
I
crisis?
say, the crisis. There is one crisis, the big financial crisis in the world, and
Financial crisis.
yeah, the
But
big.
that's not a debt crisis. Well,
Now,
how did it become a debt?
moment,
Okay.
and then banks, for instance, German banks, French banks, had bought Italian, Greek, Spanish debt, national debt,
Bonds.
bonds that yielded more interest, and they hoped that they would increase in price. On the contrary, the crisis arrived, so they found themselves with all these problems, and their accounts looked dreadful.
But
Terrible.
that's their problem. That's
No, but they were
risk
safe.
of investment, or not?
I know, but it is very. It's everybody does it. They try to shift it onto the next person. And before we were all friends because there was no real problem. But then with the crisis, everybody started wanting to hold their money close to their neck. And they withdrew the money. The money froze. It didn't circulate before. Before we had complete circulation. We had organized this euro so that the money may be Germans sold a machine here. We paid for the machine. The money went to Germany. Italy had a debt, and the Germans said, "Okay, debt, and let's invest in Italy."
Why didn't you make the Germans buy something from Italy or from Spain or from Greece?
Because the interesting thing is that they were more efficient with
in what way?
with one exchange rate. The thing is that you have to accept two things. The first, that who produces for the lowest cost exports and sells. And the second is that the people who sell have to reinvest the money in the other country. Now, Germans did that. But they noticed that they were investing everything in other countries and not investing at home enough. And people like my colleague Hans Werner Zinn, you know, the man with the beard,
Yeah.
he is a great responsible. One of the initiators of the problem was him, because he organized a system of figures which he put on print and told. He's a very influential person. He's a very good
I heard of him.
traditional economist, and he was believed by people. Said, we are investing our money in Italy, and your son cannot find a job here, and he will not become a great mechanic like his father because the people are not investing here, but they're investing somewhere else. But that was not the principle on which the euro worked. I told you, two principles. You sell to me, and then you invest in my country. At a certain point, they said, no, that's not what.
So I can sell to you.
Of course, and this carries on.
Right.
And they got frightened because of Hans Werner Zinn and this peer. But there were many problems. There are problems. For instance, German technical schools, and they're the best in the world. Nobody wants to attend them anymore. Because they all go to university, and the technical school, you don't go to university. You stop there and find a job. They don't like it. There's been the university in Germany, 70% of the people finish high school, go to university.
Wait,
70, I said.
no.
How
I
much?
mean, we have a different school system. I mean, there only 20% go to the gymnasium where you can get a diploma for the university. So
Yeah, but that is apparently not true anymore because it has been what we call the licealizzazione, which means that everybody wants to be in these schools and then proceed to university.
but not everybody can get a degree. And I mean,
But there are several ways of getting a degree.
but I mean,
You don't need only to go to the gymnasium.
right.
You can go to other modern schools,
Right.
and then you go to university,
Right.
and that's what's happened.
But I mean,
And nobody wants to go to these famous technical schools.
Right.
But then your famous German technician doesn't exist anymore. And the result is that you probably, if you are interested, there is an interesting phenomenon, is that the technicians, the machinery experts and so on, in Germany, where they're famous and the best in the world, have now become less good than in Slovakia.
really,
Yes, there is called reverse maquiladora, so that when you are relocating a part of production to Slovakia, it used to be the easiest part. Then the finishing part is done by our famous technician. No, it's the opposite. The clever thing is done by the Slovakian machinists because he's just as good and there's much less. And then, in order to finish it in Germany, they do the easier things in Germany. There's been articles by German economists. That's how I know it.
right?
And they are not at all revolutionaries. There is a special professor at the University of Munich who's done an article called Reverse Maquiladoras. You know what the maquiladoras?
No.
The maquiladoras are all those factories in Mexico that produce pieces, parts for the United States.
Yes.
And that's the principle. It's been imitated by everybody.
So
But now it's reversed in the sense that they produce the difficult one in Slovakia, and then in order to have made in Germany written on it, which is, like our fashion, your goods have a special made in Germany price, which is more than if it said made in Slovakia. They bring them back to Germany, finish them, but with the easier things. Because the technical school, this has all been studied by economists and economic historians. They were very worried in Germany because they told me this story, and I told them, look, this is what happens to us as well. He said, well, that does not help me, said the man. If it happens in Italy, it means not particularly good thing for us.
But how do we change that, or do we have to change it?
It's very difficult to change it because we have all countries like Germany and Italy and Spain, especially Germany and Italy and Austria and the others, have got population dynamics, which is very bad. Everybody's old. And we're getting older, and older people means more pension. You have an enormous pension problems, which you have decided not to talk about.
But
We have decided because we were compelled to do it and accept much smaller pensions. Now you have resolved it with this Kurzarbeit and with the two categories which you were
change it
referring
all
before.
a little bit.
Yes.
Right.
But, this is a series of problems which make coexistence in the European Union very difficult because the European Union was based on growth.
I mean, you mentioned the pension system. I mean, the German pension system is obviously not doing great. Do you know Switzerland? Like, the pension system seems to work because everybody contributes to it. Like
I know.
everybody. Like, would that be a solution for Europe?
Well, the solution with pensions in Europe is terrible because the French have it, Germans have it, and the Italians used to have it until they were told by IMF and everybody else. But in '92, a long time ago, said, look, your pension system is terrible, and let's do something about it.
Why was it supposed to be terrible?
Because because it is an in-out system. If you have the basis of it is that enough young people contributing for the old people to take their pensions.
Right.
I know, but if there aren't enough young people, what do you do? This is what happens.
Make the rich pay more.
That is a very good question. I am all in favor of that.
But
Nobody applies it.
why?
Because the rich tend to have capital outside.
Well, make them get it back.
You have to kill them.
What?
You have to squeeze them in a way that European countries are not used to.
I mean,
So nobody wants really to do it.
I
So
mean,
it's a status quo, it's a status quo. It is a difficult solution, difficult problems with terrible solution. And usually the people who find solutions that are hard on the people are,
rich themselves.
they're usually blamed for it. For Mr. Schroeder is finished as a politician. He's very good to be the chairman of Gazprom and so on. But as a politician in Germany, he's finished. But if you have remained a rich country, it is his merit. Because Mr. Hartz, whom he recruited, punished the workers. So if you have the guts of punishing the workers, you are working for the system, you see? And he did work for the system. Well, Mrs. Merkel is yielding all the results of without the pain. Well, that's luck, Machiavelli used to say that fortuna, which means luck, is the main thing. If you're lucky, it's important.
So I just talked to a political guy, Sergio. He said Mr. Renzi is trying what Schroeder did. So is Renzi's successor gonna be the lucky guy and not Mr. Renzi?
If Renzi manages to do it, because Schroeder did it.
Right. And
But
Renzi wants to do what Schroeder did.
well, he wants to do it.
Punish the workers.
See, but a bit, The Italian system is that everything is a bit.
Bit by
Poco a poco.
Right.
Because nobody had the guts that Schroeder had and Hartz had. Why did they have those guts? Because of the reunification of Germany, which was a state of exception. And the Germans accepted things they would have never accepted before because they were told, look, we have these brothers here we have to look for, and you have to accept to be less rich now so that they can have a little bit themselves, and then in 20 years' time we will be the first in the world.
Why do you have to? Why do you have? Why do you have
It
to?
doesn't work.
Why do you have to have guts to punish the people? Why don't you have? Why don't you have guts to like take away from those who have a lot?
Because that is very.
Isn't that easier?
Yes, it is easier, but it's interesting that the reforms against the people, the workers, are almost all done by so-called left governments.
So-called.
Yeah, because they are acceptable to the workers. They accept them, they take them, they believe their people. If the conservatives come on and say the same thing, they say, you're a bloody conservative, we don't believe you, strike. And if you strike, the thing is not done.
I learned that
it's complicated.
I learned that's like a phenomenon of neoliberalism. If the left does it, then
the left is always done it.
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, they call themselves left.
I know.
They're for the workers, not punish the workers.
But the interesting thing is that the workers still believe them because they get voted.
So why do they believe them? Is it propaganda or wrong education?
Look, why do people go to church?
Because they want to believe in something that's not there?
No, because their fathers and mothers went to church normally.
Tradition.
Oh. In countries, it's interesting. In Italy, there are a few regions that have always been voting for the communists. And they are the better organized and more civilized regions. And suppose you are the son of a worker and you become a capitalist, you start your own company. You might to keep voting for the communists. You don't vote for the others. It's interesting. So it's like religions. And my father was a socialist. I am a socialist.
But that's not democracy then.
But what do you want? These are real systems.
I mean, I think you should have a choice, and you should think about the choice, and not there might be a choice, but.
But who told you that people are rational? For instance, this is a presupposition of the Enlightenment. But the most civilized country in the world, which used to be your own, turned to Hitler in 3 years. Were people rational? I don't think so.
But what will
And the
will
same happened to us.
but I mean what will lead to what will all this irrationality of the people, the parties, all,
You know, the first time it led to the First World War,
well,
and the second time it led to the Second World War. Not always do you find a good solution. I'm an old man, I can tell you.
are you afraid that it's there's in the end going to be a war?
Yes, the only thing that prevents a war is the atom bomb. That's true, the nuclear threat. Because it's not a war like you advance, you retreat, and a few people die. No, this time you've launched that, it's finished.
That's why we have to get rid of the nuclear bombs.
Well, that would be a good idea. But again, suppose a few people get rid of them, some other people will get them. Who prevents them from doing so? You have to bomb them to prevent them from bombing you. It's
So
very
we're-
difficult. I'm only a poor economist.
So we're fucked.
Eh? No, not
I mean,
necessarily.
do you have any hope? I mean, it sounds like.
No, the main thing is not to take yes/no solutions.
Of course.
To take the world as it is and as it moves. And that means that, for instance, Italy has been declining for 20 years and nobody realized.
Really?
Yes.
Declining, but nobody
Nobody realized.
People were thinking.
I realized because it's my job.
Right.
And I wrote about it. But people said, no, but we have all this made in Italy glorious. Everybody is buying our shoes. And I said, look, if you sum the shoes and the other things we used to make, the shoes are not too important. And then you will lose them to Brazil. And that means that you'll only have the top shoes at 1 million euros per pair made here. But that's not enough to employ the people. No, because we were the specialists of what is called affordable luxury, which is middle class luxury.
Right.
Now, when you have the whole world,
But that's not luxury then.
but when you have the world, the redistribution of income towards the rich is a world phenomenon. There are even films about it now. And so the affordable luxury people became fewer. And now we have to turn to work and make shoes for only the very rich. But the people employed by that are 1/10 of what it used to be before.
I learned that there are 80 people in the world that have as much money as the half of the whole world.
Yeah, that is possible indeed. Almost certainly true. And,
Do we have to change that, or do we say, okay?
It would be advisable, but I can let it.
How can half the world change that they those 80 people?
You can't ask me because I belong to a generation
Right.
that has destroyed the world. All these things that we have done
But you know
for
better
good
now.
reasons managed to destroy the world. So you cannot ask advice from people who have done the opposite. You have to find it for yourself, young man. Otherwise, I'll tell you something which, when I thought honestly to do, turned out not to be a good idea. Me and my generation. Now, you see, Europe, we are pro-Europeans, all of us, because I was born under the bombs in a refuge. So, like your dad or your grandfather.
World War II.
And that means we don't want to see them again. And for that reason, we have accepted all sorts of things in Europe. And good old Kohl, he was sent to fight the Russians when he was 17. He said, look, he told me, and he told many others, we have to do it immediately, something. Because the next people don't know what has happened. They can't imagine what it means being in Berlin in 1945 or in Coventry. Everything destroyed.
So Renzi hasn't been in a war. Merkel wasn't born in the war. Is that a problem? No?
That is a problem, but it could be the solution because they're not afraid. Trouble is that if they're not afraid, they might do things that we would have never done, like quarrel with the Germans, quarrel with the Italians, bring them to a level where they take the flag again. And the flag was something we didn't use anymore.
But I learned, if you're not afraid, you're not careful.
Exactly, that's true. That is a problem about being not afraid, that sometimes you might exaggerate because you don't know what happens when people are brought to the point to which the Germans were brought in 1930 by the Allies. And so they revolted and they voted for an Austrian madman. Because you don't have to forget that he was Austrian. It wasn't part of your civilization at all. I think the Germans have been maligned. The real problem is the Austrian Catholic anti-Semitic people. Because Catholicism is anti-Semitic, Polish.
Right.
And all the poor Germans were led into it by all sorts of extremely bad things that were done to them, like lies, for instance. Second World War was another thing. It was run by a madman. So
Give us some hope at the end. How can like realistically Italy's decline be stopped? How can there be?
No, it can be stopped, but what I fear is that we cannot go back to a fast growth path.
So
It will live a small growth.
well, but
That's not enough.
that's back to the neoliberalism. They need growth. That's the key of capitalism. Right?
What do we say? Socialism in one country doesn't work. When you have the whole of Europe being united, so that I can ship any good or any book or whatever I want, wherever I want in 2 days, it's very difficult to reorganize protectionism. Very difficult.
I mean, that's what Lenin said, right? Socialism. Lenin, didn't he say socialism can only work if everybody does it?
Well, that's what they try to do. They try to, how do you say, win Germany, which was the how do you say, the developed part, and United with Russia was on the developed part, and have socialism viable. But then it didn't work out like that.
But I mean, America is the biggest power, the biggest capitalist power. So maybe we have to wait for America to know better, and then we.
Well, I think unfortunately Americans are like us, in a not a very good moment, because if you look at how many of these so-called neoconservatives there are, the people who want to prevent abortion, all this, it's unbelievable.
It's from the last century.
Well, even more, even older than the last century. I find it absolutely remarkable, because in my generation we looked at America as the good for everything, sort of. And then
Being progressive.
Yeah, progressive in everything and modern. And then it started going down. And it's at the moment in a very bad state. And I don't know what's coming next, really.
Do you think you will see the change that needs to happen?
I don't really think so, because I don't have too many years to live. And I think that what we have done it for a number of years. I admit my failure, but I don't know what to advise people if I have failed.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Arrivederci.